Hey everybody, welcome back to Calibrate Tools, and today we're going to talk about how to bend pipes with a pipe bender. So stick around and I'll see you guys right after this. Okay guys, the first thing we want to do is get familiar with some of the markings and symbols that you're going to see on a conduit bender or pipe bender head, and here they are. So this arrow here is used for 90-degree bends, also called stub ups. It's also used for offsets and the outer markings of saddle bends. So anytime you would do any of those bends, you would place this arrow on the mark on your conduit or your pipe, to make the bends. Now that arrow is also on the other side of the pipe bender head, and that's this mark right here. Okay, of course some people find it easier, and it can be much easier to use that arrow on this side because you can see the pipe, you can see the conduit right here and where the mark is on the conduit, right, as opposed to the other side where it's blocked off by all this metal here. But sometimes it's necessary just to use this side, so that's why they have both markings. Now the star here, this star symbol right here, is used for 90-degree back bends where, you don't necessarily have to do any math with that kind of bend. And I'll show you what I'm talking about later. Now this teardrop symbol here with a notch, and you can also see the star also has a notch. But this teardrop symbol here, it locates the center of saddle bends. Now, these lines here with the numbers under them represent the degree scale, right? So you have 10 degrees, 22.5 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and so forth, right? So anytime you bend your conduit has to be parallel to any of these lines, okay, depending on what degree you want to bend it. And so for example, say this pen is the conduit, right? You would bring it down parallel to that line, right? Depending on what degree you want to bend it. Or if it's 22.5, you would bring it down parallel to that line as well, and so on and so forth. Okay guys, I cut off a short piece of conduit here and I marked it here to better illustrate where you would place it in the hook area of the head. So remember, this is the hook area of the head. This is where you hook onto your conduit right here. Okay, so you would take your piece of conduit and your mark, and let's just say if you want to make a 90-degree bend or an offset, you place it in the hook like so, and you line up the mark with the arrow. You see that? You line up the mark with the arrow and you bend from there. And depending on the degree that you want to bend it at, say 10 degrees, the line for 10 degrees is right there, right above the 10, and you make sure that your conduit is parallel to that line at the end of the bend, and so on and so forth for whatever degree you want to bend it. 22.5, it would be parallel to that line above the, with the 22.5, 30, 45. Okay guys, another important thing to know about conduit benders or pipe benders is that they're not universal. Okay, now this particular one we're using today is made for a 1/2 inch EMT only, right? And EMT stands for electrical metallic tubing, right? Just a fancy name for electrical piping. And that's what we used in the last clip. That's what we're looking at right now. So you want to make sure that your pipe bender or conduit bender is properly sized for the size pipe that you're going to use, or size conduit that you're going to bend. So if it's not, you can end up damaging the pipe, crimping the pipe, and you don't want that. Okay, now you may be wondering what this means. Stubs 5 inches and up. So let's refer to a diagram with a table to better explain what that means. Okay, so I have a diagram in front of us to better understand what's a stub and what does the 5 inches and up mean. So if we look at this diagram right here, we see a 90-degree bend. Now a stub is simply the short end of the 90-degree bend. So that would be this end right here. This is the stub, right? Okay, so the size of your conduit or pipe will determine how much you need to subtract from the measurement that you need to complete your distance and make everything fit properly. So fortunately, they have tables that help you do that. Now, it's called a bender take-up table, right? How much you need to take up or subtract from your measurement to complete the distance and make the proper fit. So if you have a 1/2 inch EMT, you would need to subtract 5 inches. If you have a 3/4 of an inch EMT, you would need to subtract 6 inches. If you have a 1/2 inch rigid pipe, you would need to subtract 6 inches. If you have a 1 inch EMT, you would need to subtract 8 inches. If you have a 3/4 of an inch rigid pipe, you would need to subtract 8 inches. If you have a 1 1/4 of an inch EMT, you would need to subtract 11 inches. And if you have a 1 inch rigid, you would need to subtract 11 inches. Okay, guys, we're going to do a 90-degree stub up bend, okay? So first thing we want to do is pick our measurement. What measurement do we need? Well, in this case, just for the sake of illustration, we'll just pick something, okay? An arbitrary measurement like 12 inches. So we measure 12 inches from the tip of our conduit back. That would be right here. And because this is a 1/2 inch EMT, what do we need to take away? What do we need to take up or subtract? Well, according to the table that we looked at, because this is a 1/2 inch EMT, that will be 5 inches subtracted, right? So 12 minus 5 is 7, right? So we would subtract 5 inches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, landing right on the 7 here. Okay, and that's where we need to make our bend. Okay, guys, so we measured from the tip or end of the conduit all the way back 12 inches, right? And then, because it's a 1/2 inch EMT, we had to take 5 inches off, and we landed right here to 7 inches, okay? That's called bender take up. So we took it up 5 more inches. Okay, so once you have your mark, you want to make sure that you place, place the conduit and line up the arrow with the mark. Can you see how that's lined up? From there, you make your 90-degree bend. So you place your conduit on the floor, okay? And make sure that it's stable and flat on a flat surface. You don't want any rough surfaces. So if you're somewhere where the levels are off, try to find the flattest place to make the bend, okay? And you simply pull it up like so. And you don't want the heel of the pipe bender or the conduit bender, and that's this right here. You don't necessarily want that to touch the pipe, but you want it almost to touch there, okay? So you take your level, that looks pretty good to me, guys. That's a 90-degree stub up. Okay, guys, the next bend that we're going to make is going to be called a back-to-back bend. And that's simply 2 90-degree bends turned up in one piece of conduit. And the ends are usually turned up in the same plane, okay? So it looks like a U shape. And you usually do that when you're running conduit between 2 parallel surfaces like walls or rafters or joists. Okay, so we already have our 90-degree bend in this first piece of conduit that we made in the last clip, okay? So we just need to make a second 90-degree bend to make our back-to-back bend. Okay, so we're gonna measure another 12 inches from the end of the long end of the conduit. Remember, this was the stub end, but we're gonna measure 12 inches from this end now, okay? So we got 12 right here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the hook end of the pipe bender, of the conduit bender, that's this end, okay? And we're going to point that towards the end of the conduit. Then we're going to bring it down. And you see the mark? This time, we're going to line it up with the star. Can you guys see that star there? And that's where we're going to make our bend. Another good tip is that when you mark your conduit, you want to mark it all the way around so that you don't lose sight of your mark when you place it in the conduit bender, the pipe bender. And you want to make sure that both ends are on the same plane, okay? This end, I'm tapping with my finger, it's going to be on the same plane as the bend. That's why I have it turned up. Okay, so here we go. You don't want to use the handle. You want to press down as much as you can with your foot. There you go, guys. That is a back-to-back bend. Okay, guys, the next bend that we're going to tackle is called an offset bend. And that's what this is in this diagram that I pulled up. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It's some conduit that offsets, as you can see, right? And it also comes with a table, right, to help you calculate where to make your marks on the conduit so you can make an offset bend. So let's get right into that. Okay, guys, why would we use an offset bend? Well, let's just say this is the conduit and it's running flush with the wall, which is this table, for example. And it needs to enter an electrical box, for instance, right? Or it may even need to jump over the box. Well, in that case, the conduit needs to be offset so it can either enter the box or jump over the box entirely, right? So that's why you need to know how to make offset bends when you encounter situations like this. And it's very common in the electrical or electrician's world. Okay, guys, let's just say that we want to jump entirely over this electrical box. We don't want to enter it. We just want to jump over it, right? So first thing we want to do is decide what is the offset distance, right? That's necessary, okay, in order for this piece of conduit to clear this electrical box, all right? Okay, guys, for the sake of illustration, like I said, this piece of wood is an electrical box. All right, so let's measure that. That's about 1.5 inches high, right? And this is our conduit right here. So let's just say our conduit's about 8 inches from the box. Okay, that's where we're gonna make our bend, our first offset, right? About 8 inches. Yeah, there you go. And so at what degree or angle do you think we should make the bend? Well, let's go for about 10 degrees, okay? So it'll be a 10 degree bend. There you go, okay? Okay, guys, so we determined that our offset angle is going to be about 10 degrees, right? Based on the height of the electrical box and the distance away from the electrical box the conduit is. So if we go to our chart, once again, we see that 10 degrees has a multiplier of 6 and a shrink per inch offset of 1/16, which equals about 0.063, right? Shrink per inch of offset, what is that? So when you offset a piece of conduit like that, the length of it, lessens. It shrinks because of the offset, right? That's what shrink per inch is, and you have to account for that anytime you make an offset. Okay, guys, the next thing we need to figure out is our total shrink per inch. Total shrink per inch equals offset distance times shrink per inch. Now we know our offset distance was 1.5 inches high. That's how tall the electrical box is in our example. And we know our shrink per inch for 10 degrees, as mentioned before, is 0.063 according to the table. So we get 0.0945 of total shrinkage. Then we add that 0.0945 to the distance to the electrical box. And we said that was 8 inches, right? and we come up with 8.0945. Well, you might as well just say 8. And that is the distance where you make your first mark on your conduit. Okay, so based on our calculations, the first mark that we're going to make on our conduit is going to be 8 inches from the end, from the tip. And remember, we want to mark all the way around so that we won't lose sight of the mark when we use our conduit bender or pipe bender. Okay, there you go. That's our first mark, guys. That's where our first bend, 10-degree bend, is going to be. Okay, so the next task is to figure out where the second bend is going to be. So the way we do that is we have to multiply the offset distance, which we said was 1.5 inches high. So it's 1.5 inches, okay, times the constant multiplier, right? And what did we say the constant multiplier was for 10 degrees? It was 6. So that's 1.5 times 6. So when we multiply 1.5 inches times 6, which is the constant multiplier for 10 degrees, we get 9. Okay, guys, so 9 inches will be the distance between the first and second mark. Now, we know our first mark is 8 inches from the edge, okay? From the tip, right there, 8 inches. So if we go 9 more inches, we get 17 inches, okay? So that's where our second mark is going to be. Okay, we're going to mark all the way around to make sure we don't lose it when we're using the pipe bender. Okay, guys, so we have our first mark and we have our second mark. So let's go ahead and bend something. Okay, guys, first thing we want to do when we place our conduit in the conduit bender is we want to make sure that the hook portion, which is this part right here, is facing away from the second mark. Now, we know that this is the first mark right here, the 8-inch mark, and 9 inches away, we have the second mark, right? So we want to make sure that the hook portion, this is facing away from that second mark, okay? And when we install it, we bring it down to the first mark. See how the arrow is lined up with the first mark? That's what we want, guys. So let's bend this thing. Okay, guys, so the arrow is lined up with the first mark, okay? So we're going to bend this down to 10 degrees, which is right here. So as you can see, the conduit is parallel to that 10-degree line right there, okay? Okay, that's our 10-degree bend, okay, on the first mark. Then we're going to turn the conduit over 180 degrees and place the second mark on the arrow. That's this mark right here, okay? So we have it on the arrow. There's the arrow and there's the second mark. And we're going to bend it another 10 degrees. There's that second mark, and there's a 10-degree bend. Okay, guys, let's see how the offset bend we just made worked out. So here's the electrical box, and here's the offset. Okay, that's about 8 inches away. Looks like a pretty good offset to me, guys. What do you think? Okay, guys, the last bend that we're going to talk about today is called a 3-point saddle, and that's that right there. So let's get right to it. Okay, so 3-point saddle bends are a type of offset bend, except as you can see, the difference is it returns to the original plane that it started out from, okay? So it jumps over an obstacle, whether that's conduit or whatever, and returns to the original plane. Okay, guys, the first thing we need to do, just like we did in the last offset bend, is we need to determine the offset distance necessary to clear the obstacle. Okay, and this is our mock obstacle right here. And that will determine how far away the saddle bend will need to be, okay, from the edge of the conduit right here, okay? The difference here, though, is that with this obstacle, we need to measure the midpoint on this obstacle, okay? The center of this obstacle before we can go any further. So let's do that. Okay, so the midpoint of this obstacle here is 1.25 inches. So I'm just gonna scratch that down right here on this piece of wood. All right. All right, so there you go. MP, that's midpoint, is 1.25 inches. And it's about 2.5 inches tall. And the height is about 2.5 inches tall. Okay, so the next thing we need to determine is the angle we're going to use for the center bend. That will be the bend, okay, right here. What angle are we going to use? So let's go with a 45-degree angle, a 45-degree center bend. Okay, now once you determine your center bend angle, we know now that the takeoff angle and the landing angle, in other words, where it takes off from the surface and where it lands on the surface, those two angles, will be 1/2 the center bend angle, right? So the 3-point saddle bend also has a table to help you determine, the other measurements that you will need to make the proper marks on your conduit. So here we have the table right here, and we did say that our obstruction height is about 2.5, but we rounded up to 3 inches, okay? So our shrink amount will be 9/16, okay? And the distance off the center mark, both ways, left and right, will be 7.5 inches, right? So we're gonna use this column here because it's the 45-degree center bend column, okay? So we know that the other two return angles will be 22.5 degrees, okay? Because that's half of 45 degrees. Okay, guys, so the next step, just like in the other offset example that we did, we have to find out where to place our first mark on our conduit, which is this right here, okay? But we have to know the distance from the conduit, the end of the conduit right here, to the midpoint of the obstacle. And we see here that's about 20 inches, okay? Okay, so once we find out what the distance is from the end of the conduit to the midpoint of the obstacle, okay, we need to determine what the shrinkage is, okay? And we need to add the shrinkage to that distance. So according to the chart, the shrinkage for a 3-inch high obstacle, which is this, okay, we said it's about, we rounded up to about 3 inches, right? So the shrinkage is 9/16. So we have to add that to the distance from the conduit to the midpoint. So, and we said that's about 20 inches. So that center mark, okay, will be 20 and 9/16. Okay, guys, so we determined that our center bend was 45 degrees and that our center mark was 20 and 9/16, right? So now we have to determine where our first distance off center mark will be. Now, if we refer back to the table here, we see that the distance off center mark for our obstruction height, okay, will be 7.5, right? So in order to determine the first distance off center mark, we have to subtract 7.5 from 20 and 9/16, okay? And if we look at the calculations here on this piece of wood I got here, 20 and 9/16 minus 7.5 equals 13 inches, okay? So 13 inches is gonna be our first distance off center mark. And to determine our second distance off center mark, we have to add 7.5 to 20 and 9/16, and we get 28 inches, okay? So here we have our center mark, 20 and 9/16, our first distance off center mark, which is 13 inches, and our second distance off center mark, which is 28 inches. Okay, guys, so now that we know our center mark and our distance off center marks, let's go ahead and mark our conduit with the appropriate markings so we can start bending. Okay, so we know our center mark is 20 and 9/16. Okay, so that's, if you bring it a little closer, I know it's upside down, but I'm pretty sure you guys can read that. So 20 and 9/16 is right after the half mark, the 20 and a half mark. That first tick after the 20 and a half mark is 9/16. So that's 20 and 9/16, okay? So let's mark our conduit with our center mark first. So 20 and 9/16, it's gonna be right here. Okay. And we wanna make sure that we bring it all the way around so we don't lose sight of it. So our second mark that we're gonna make is gonna be our first distance off center mark. And that's 7.5 inches from 20 and 9/16, which brought us to 13 inches, right? So let's go ahead and mark that. So here we go, 20 and 9/16, 7.5, right down to 13. Okay, let's bring it all the way around. All right. Now our third mark is going to be our second distance off center mark. And we calculated that to be 28 inches. So that's 7.5 inches added to 20 and 9/16. And that would be about 28 inches right here. We're going to bring that all the way around. Okay, guys, there you have it. We have our center mark, our first distance off center mark at 13 inches, and our third mark, which is our second distance off center mark at 28 inches. Okay, so let's get to bending. Okay, guys, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our center mark, which is this right here, right? We're going to put that on the teardrop notch. See that notch there in the teardrop? That's for 45-degree bends. So let's go ahead and do that. See that, guys? Right on the notch, the teardrop notch right there. Okay? Then once we do that, we simply bend the conduit down to 45 degrees. Remember, 45 degrees was our center bend angle. And that's the 45-degree line there, 45. So let's go ahead and bend it down. There you go, guys. That's a 45-degree bend. Okay, guys, we have our 45-degree angle. Now we need to bend our 22.5-degree first bend, okay? So here's the first mark right here, and we need to bend that to 22.5 degrees, okay? So here we go. We want to line it up with the arrow this time instead of the teardrop, okay? And then we bend it back to 22.5 degrees, which is right about here, okay? So here we go. Okay, guys, there's our 22.5 degree bend. All right, let me bring it a little closer to you. There's 22.5, and the conduit is parallel to that, okay? Okay, guys, now for our third and final mark, which is this mark right here at 28 inches, we have to line it up with the arrow as well and bend it to 22.5 degrees again. So I placed it in the hook and the cradle, right? And I'm going to bend it down to 22.5 degrees. It's lined up with the arrow. Here we go. Okay, guys. Hey, guys. There's our 3-point saddle. Let's see how it works out. It looks pretty good to me. What do you think? Okay, guys, I know it was a long video, and for those of you that stuck around, I really appreciate it, and I hope you learned something today about conduit benders, aka pipe benders. And if you like what you saw today, hit that like and subscribe button and that notification bell so you can get more of my content, because I really enjoy giving it out to you guys. Okay? So I'll see you guys in the next video, and have a good one.